Divorce, I had once thought, was something that happened to other people, strangers in courtrooms, or bitter acquaintances whose names I'd only hear in whispered family gossip. It was never supposed to happen to me. My marriage had seemed solid from the outside, but beneath the neat holiday cards and polite dinner parties, it was crumbling like old plaster. When my husband finally left, he took with him not just his things, but the last shreds of my self-worth. The papers were signed on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day that blurred the world's edges and made even city lights seem dull and distant. I went home to a silent apartment, half-empty closets, and the heavy hush of a life abruptly interrupted. Friends called with sympathetic voices, but their words echoed hollow. Mom brought soup and tried to fuss over me, but I could see the worry lines deepening at the corners of her eyes. But my sister, Madison Maddie, had other ideas. She didn't believe in quietly supporting from the sidelines, or in letting wounds heal in privacy. Madison was the golden child, the star. She thrived on spectacle and attention, and my divorce me humiliation became her stage. At first, it was little things. Snide remarks about finally being free, jokes about how my ex must have run for his life, comments on social media with just enough bite to sting. But the real blow came at our cousin Rachel's engagement party, less than 2 weeks after my life had fallen apart. Our whole family was there, buzzing with excitement and champagne, the air thick with the scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Maddie held court at the center of it all, hair shining, laughter bright and sharp. I tried to keep a low profile, sitting near the back, sipping ginger ale, practicing my best "I'm okay" smile for every well-meaning aunt and old family friend. But Maddie was never one to let a spotlight pass her by. She took the mic during the toasts, her voice ringing clear through the hall. Let's all give Rachel and Tom a round of applause. They give us hope that true love still exists. Because, as we know, it sure doesn't for everyone. Laughter rippled, a few people glancing awkwardly in my direction. Maddie wasn't done. She launched into a funny story about how she caught me crying over rom-coms with a pint of ice cream, mimicking my voice with cruel accuracy. "It's okay, sis," she called out, raising her glass in my direction. "You're still invited to my wedding. Maybe you'll catch the bouquet and get luckier next time." The crowd erupted, some genuinely amused, others just uncomfortable. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. My fork trembled in my hand. I told myself to laugh, to act unbothered, to let her joke slide. But it hurt. God, it hurt. For the rest of the night, Maddie's friends huddled around her, trading stories and snickers, their eyes drifting to me with poorly masked pity or curiosity. Every whispered comment felt like a fresh wound. Every shared look a reminder that my failure was their entertainment. But it didn't end there. Maddie had a knack for blending real life and social media. Her Instagram stories were a running chronicle of her wedding journey, and I became a recurring punchline. Screenshots of my texts asking for space were posted with captions like, "Sisters, can't live with them, can't stop them from being sad over exes." Her TikTok featured a viral soundbite. "How not to plan a wedding, step 1, get divorced." Every notification felt like a slap. Even people I barely knew from high school were messaging me, either with faux concern or sly amusement. Mom begged Maddie to stop, to give your sister a break, but Maddie just laughed. She needs to learn to laugh at herself. It's just a joke. Besides, it's getting me engagement. I tried blocking her, muting her, erasing her from my feeds, but there was no escaping her reach, not in our family, not online, not in the comments that followed me everywhere. The isolation was suffocating. Friends grew distant, unsure what to say or how to act around me. I found myself shrinking from invitations, avoiding family dinners, spending my evenings at work or in the quiet sanctuary of the law library. Even there, Maddie's shadow found MECO workers whispered about her latest post. Clients asked if I was the sister from TikTok. My reputation, hard-won over years of work and late nights, suddenly felt flimsy, undermined by viral jokes and Maddie's relentless mockery. I thought of confronting her more than once. I rehearsed the words in the mirror, but every time I saw her flushed with attention, surrounded by laughter, I lost my nerve. Part of me wondered if I deserved it. Part of me still wanted her approval, her affection, her validation. The worst was the loneliness. In the silence of my apartment, with the city glowing cold and distant outside my window, I replayed every moment Maddie had twisted the knife, every laugh at my expense, every story she spun to make herself shine brighter. My pain had become her punchline, and there was no one left to laugh with me, only at me. But pain, I learned, is a strange alchemy. It burns at first, then it hardens. It teaches you to close doors, to build walls, to find new sources of strength in the ruins of old certainties. The Lamy career became my refuge. I threw myself into work, staying late, taking the hardest cases, studying precedent until my eyes ached. I specialized in contracts, in prenuptial agreements, and the messy aftermath of broken promises. I listened to strangers pour out their stories, and bit by bit, I found a strange comfort in helping them build something new from what had shattered. All the while, Maddie's star kept rising. Her engagement was splashed across every platform bridesmaids' fittings, venue tours, sponsored posts with ring companies and cake designers. Her fiancé, Ethan, was charming and well-connected, his family wealthy and protective. Their wedding was shaping up to be the event of the year, and Maddie reveled in every second. To the world, she was radiant. To me, she was a Warninga living reminder of how quickly love could sour, how easily trust could be broken, how laughter could cut deeper than silence. But beneath my pain, something new was growing, a determination. A quiet, stubborn will. If Maddie could reinvent herself, so could I. If she could turn my struggles into spectacle, I would turn my humiliation into fuel. I promised myself, never again would I let someone else, no matter how close, write my story, define my worth, or turn my pain into their content. Little did Maddie know, our roles were about to change. She saw me as the failure, the joke, the cautionary tale at her wedding. But she hadn't counted on the strength that comes from surviving the furor, the kind of justice only a sister-turned-lawyer could deliver. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't a punchline. It's the look on your enemy's face when you walk into the room holding all the cards. And Maddie was about to learn exactly what that looked like. After the sting of my sister's mockery faded into a slow-burning ache, I realized something quietly transformative had taken place. Maddie's laughter still echoed in my memory, and her posts still stung, but somewhere in that hurt, I began to notice a hardening inside myself, a necessary armor, forged in the fire of public humiliation. There was no shortcut through heartbreak, only the slow, methodical business of survival. I started by claiming small victories, showing up to work every morning, no matter how puffy-eyed or raw I felt, keeping my apartment clean even when all I wanted was to melt into the couch with takeout and old movies, forcing myself to answer the phone when my mother called, to assure her that yes, I'd eaten something, and no, I wasn't letting Maddie get to me anymore. It wasn't glamorous. There were still days I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. But as the months crawled by, I began to realize that the more I poured myself into my work, the more I found purpose, not just distraction. At the firm, I was given more responsibilities. My boss, an old-school contract lawyer with a sharp eye and zero patience for nonsense, noticed my late nights and growing competence. I found a surprising affinity for the most complex cases: family law, prenuptial contracts, property disputes, the messiest parts of love and money. The patterns of other people's heartbreak, played out in depositions and mediation rooms, became puzzle pieces for me to solve. Something about contracts spoke to my wounded sense of order. Every heartbreak I saw left a paper trail. Text messages, asset lists, prenups, custody schedules. If love could shatter in 1,000 unpredictable ways, the aftermath at least followed a structure. I could guide my clients through the wreckage, help them secure what was left, help them fight for their dignity. I did for strangers what I couldn't do for myself until, bit by bit, I realized I was healing too. Meanwhile, Maddie's wedding preparations became a rolling circus, and the family group chat was flooded with her latest OMG moment bridesmaid drama, cake-tasting meltdowns, and a steady stream of ring selfies. Each post was more performative than the last, It was as if she was building a fairy tale from glitter and Instagram likes, daring anyone to point out the cracks in the veneer. Our mother, ever the peacekeeper, begged me to come to dress fittings, tastings, even the bridal shower. I went, sometimes out of guilt, sometimes just to prove to myself I could be in the same room as Maddie and not fall apart. In public, I kept my composure, even as Maddie's little jabs continued veiled as jokes, always with a laugh and a flick of her hair. "Don't worry, sis, you'll find someone eventually." She'd chirp, her friends cackling around her. If anyone noticed my clenched jaw or the way my hands trembled as I poured the champagne, they didn't say. But in private, things began to shift. I started to see Maddie not as a force of nature but as a flawed human being, someone desperate for attention, for control, for reassurance that her story would never end like mine. And as my confidence grew, her barbs began to bounce off me, no longer sinking in the way they once did. Then, one late afternoon, everything changed. I was working on a particularly nasty divorce case when I got a call from the senior partner, Mr. Reed. His tone was brisk but respectful. "You've got a new assignment, important client, confidentiality required. High profile. You'll be handling some preliminary agreements." The details arrived in a password-protected email. As I opened the files, scanning for the client's name, my breath caught. The groom, Ethan Walker, Maddie's fiancé. It was right there in black and white. Ethan's family, through their private counsel, had requested assistance drafting and reviewing a prenuptial agreement. His father, a business magnate with more money than most small countries, wanted every T crossed, every I dotted. The instructions were clear. The lawyer must remain discreet. All communications handled through intermediaries. No personal connections discussed unless strictly necessary. At first, panic clutched my chest. I considered recusing myself. The potential for disaster was obvious. If Maddie found out I was involved, the fallout would be catastrophic, both personally and professionally. But then I thought of her laughter, her endless jokes, her certainty that I was irrelevant. I remembered how small she'd tried to make me feel. A new resolve crystallized inside me. I could do this, no. I should do this. If Ethan's family wanted the best, they'd get it. I would do my job not as Maddie's sister, but as a professional who had clawed her way back from heartbreak, humiliation, and invisibility. This time, I wouldn't shrink away from the challenge. This time, I would meet it head-on. So I buried myself in the work, keeping my name off all non-essential correspondence. I reviewed Ethan's assets, business holdings, trust arrangements. I drafted airtight clauses, double-checked every loophole, ensured the agreement would withstand any test, romantic or legal. I communicated with Ethan only through secure email and scheduled conference calls with his father's attorneys, never once letting the connection slip. In the midst of this, I felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Power. Here, in the quiet of my office, my competence wasn't a punchline. My meticulous attention to detail was an asset, not a weakness. I was shaping the foundation of someone else's marriage, yes, but also building proof of my own recovery, one careful clause at a time. I attended family events with a new self-assurance. Maddie's jabs became white noise. When she asked, "What have you been up to lately, sis? Still helping the heartbroken?" I just smiled, the secret of my involvement humming beneath the surface. It was a private triumph, a card I kept close to my chest. Evenings, I returned home exhausted but strangely fulfilled. Sometimes I imagined the moment Maddie would find out, the look on her face when she realized I wasn't just her divorced, mocked sister. I was the lawyer holding her marriage in my hands. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. But most of all, I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for myself. I was reclaiming the part of me Maddie had tried to crush, showing myself and the world that no one's narrative could define me but me. The days ticked by, the wedding approached, and the prenuptial agreement was finalized. A formal negotiation would be scheduled, papers signed, and then Maddie's fairy tale would march on. Only, this time, I would be there not as a punchline, but as a force to be reckoned with. I was ready. And for the first time since my marriage fell apart, I looked in the mirror and recognized the woman staring back. She was strong. She was whole. And she was about to step into the spotlight, not as Maddie's shadow, but as her equal. Ethan Walker's family wanted discretion above all else. That was the word Mr. Reed kept using. Discretion. It hung over every email, every phone call, every document I reviewed late into the night. My boss's instructions were direct protect the client's interests, deliver airtight agreements, never betray your role, and above all, stay invisible. It was a strange sort of power, knowing the fate of Maddie's marriage was quietly being shaped by my own hands, while she had no idea I was even in the room. I kept my involvement tightly compartmentalized. At family dinners and bridal events, I smiled and nodded at Maddie's updates about floral arrangements and monogrammed napkins, all while knowing I was drafting the paperwork that would guard Ethan's family fortune from the very woman making me the butt of her jokes. I buried myself in the details. Ethan's trusts, the family's businesses, real estate portfolios, future children, inheritance rights, everything that made the Walkers wary of any, especially someone as ambitious and image-conscious as Maddie marrying into their empire. Some nights, I sat at my kitchen table with the documents splayed before me, sipping cold coffee and marveling at the surreal path my life had taken. Just months ago, Maddie's mockery had left me adrift, a punchline at family gatherings, and now, in this world of legal precision and high-stakes negotiation, I had found an anchor. The negotiation date was set for a Friday afternoon at the Walkers' downtown law office, a place of glass, steel, and intimidating views. The lead on their side was a senior partner named Miss Gold, known in legal circles for her ruthlessness. I was to attend as the firm's junior counsel, with my name on only a handful of internal memos and the core documents themselves. The Walkers' attorneys never asked about my family, never mentioned Maddie's last name. Why would they? In the world of big money, connections were assumed but rarely stated. As the date approached, my nerves became electric. I was prepared, professionally, but emotionally, I was a live wire, anxious, excited, and somehow vindicated all at once. Part of me wanted Maddie to discover the truth at the very last second, to see her face as she realized who was really in control. But part of me also wanted to stay invisible, to do the work and walk away with a silent, personal triumph. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with unusual carnavy suit, crisp white blouse, hair pulled back in a low bun, my usual work armor. I arrived early, reviewing my notes and prepping my responses to every question Miss Gold might throw at me. My job was to be unflappable, to stay in the background, to make the paperwork speak for itself. A few minutes before the meeting, Ethan's father arrived, accompanied by Ethan himself. He greeted me with a firm handshake, glancing at my card with professional indifference. Ethan looked nervous, his eyes flickering from the cityscape to the closed conference room door. "Thank you for your work," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "This isn't how I imagined things, but my family, they're careful." I nodded, maintaining my neutral smile. "My job is to protect everyone's interests. No matter what happens, you'll be prepared." Ethan seemed reassured, and his father gave me a curt, approving nod. The clock struck 2. The Walkers' lead counsel, Miss Gold, motioned for everyone to take their seats. Then, the door opened and in walked Maddie, resplendent in designer business attire, her face set in a determined smile. She was clearly there to negotiate, confident she would charm or outmaneuver anyone in her way. She didn't even glance at me at first, too caught up in greeting Ethan and shaking hands with the Walkers' attorneys. But when she finally sat across the long, polished table and looked up, her eyes landed on me confused at first, then narrowing in suspicion. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. I met her gaze evenly, heart-pounding but outwardly calm. She gave a tiny, incredulous laugh. Are you... Her voice trailed off, as if her mind refused to process what her eyes saw. I inclined my head, professional and cool. "Good afternoon, Madison." Miss Gold didn't miss a beat. "Let's begin. We're here to discuss the details of the Walker prenuptial agreement. As you know, my associate has handled much of the draft work. If you have any concerns, now is the time to raise them. The meeting began. Maddie tried to recover, smoothing her expression, but the shock lingered. I kept my focus on the documents, walking through each clause, addressing questions from both sides. When Maddie tried to turn the conversation personal, I'm sure my sister wouldn't want to make this awkward for us. I stayed strictly professional. The firm represents the Walker family's interests, Madison. My personal connection is irrelevant to the process. Maddie's attempts at humor fell flat. Her fiancé looked embarrassed, the attorneys unmoved. I could see the confidence ebbing from her, replaced by something close to panic as she realized how airtight, how inescapably fair and unbreakable my agreement was. Clause by clause, I laid out the boundaries. Assets before the marriage would remain Ethan's, family business interests protected, clear and fair spousal support arrangements, detailed definitions of marital versus separate property. Maddie's questions grew sharper, her voice less sure. Every time she tried to find a loophole, I was ready. Every time she tried to grandstand or sidestep, I brought the conversation back to the text of the agreement. It was the opposite of our dynamic at family parties. There, Maddie always had the upper hand. She was the star, I was the quiet one, the butt of the joke. But here, in this room, I was the authority, the voice of reason, the gatekeeper of her fairy tale's future. She realized it, and so did everyone else. At the end of the meeting, Miss Gold announced, "Unless there are further questions, I suggest we finalize these terms and arrange for signatures." Maddie could only nod, speechless and visibly rattled. The meeting adjourned. Ethan shook my hand, quietly grateful. His father thanked me for my work. Miss Gold gave me a rare approving nod. Maddie remained seated, gathering her things slowly, eyes fixed on me as if seeing me for the first time. As I gathered my own files, I met her gaze one last time. I didn't gloat or smirk, I simply offered a calm, measured, "Good luck, Madison." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she finally spoke, her voice much smaller than I'd ever heard. "I had no idea you could do all this." I smiled just a little. "There's a lot you never cared to know." I walked out of the glass towers into the late afternoon sun, heart racing with the adrenaline of victory not over Maddie, but over my own history, my own story. For the first time, I felt the roles truly reversed. The rest of the world might never know, but Maddie would remember. And so would I. The conference room emptied with a hush, like the air after a thunderclap. For a moment, I lingered by the table, collecting my notes, letting the adrenaline fade. Out in the marble hallway, I could hear the muffled sound of Maddie's fiancé Ethan talking to his father in low, urgent tones. The lawyers on the Walker side congratulated one another with brisk, satisfied handshakes. No one noticed Maddie standing alone by the panoramic window, staring out at the city she'd always considered her stage. I closed my leather folio, took a breath, and straightened my jacket. It was strange how steady I felt. Just months ago, Maddie's laughter and cruelty would have left me shaking, voice caught in my throat. But here, beneath the fluorescent lights and the fortress of legalese, I wasn't her victim. I was the architect of her reckoning. Maddie's eyes flicked to me as I approached. There was a vulnerability there I'd never seen before. No sharp wit, no smug smirk, just raw uncertainty. She looked smaller, out of place in her power suit, no longer the center of her own narrative. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly, barely louder than a whisper. I met her gaze, calm and unflinching. "You never asked, and this isn't about us. It's about protecting your future, and Ethan's, and his family's. It's my job." She swallowed. "But you made me look stupid in front of everyone." A soft, bitter laugh almost escaped me, but I caught it. "Maddie, you made a career out of making me look stupid. The difference is, I did my job. I did it well. You can hate me for it, but you can't say I wasn't fair." She looked down, silent. For the first time in our lives, there was nothing left for her to say. The Walkers re-entered the room for a final signature session. Ethan's father was all business, but Ethan paused as he handed over his pen. "I want to thank you," he said quietly, eyes sincere. "You treated Maddie with respect even if she didn't deserve it, and you protected us. That takes guts." Thank you, I replied, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I wish you both happiness and clarity. The documents were signed, the attorneys collected their copies, and the process was officially concluded. Maddie, now visibly subdued, hesitated as she stood to leave. For a fleeting moment, she looked at Menno as an adversary, but as a sister searching for footing. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this, she murmured. I don't need your forgiveness, Maddie, I said softly but firmly. I just need you to understand that I'm not your punchline. Not anymore. Outside, the city was a grid of gold, the day waning toward dusk. As the building's glass doors parted and I stepped into the cool evening air, I felt the old weight finally begin to slip away. The humiliation, the loneliness, the ache of being laughed at and dismissed by the very person who should have stood by my side all faded, replaced by something stronger. Dignity, pride, relief. Over the next week, word quietly spread through the family that Maddie's rock star sister was the lawyer behind the prenuptial agreement that had even Ethan's father singing my praises. My phone rang off the hook, old aunts, cousins, even former classmates reaching out, some for legal advice, some just to say, I always knew you'd do something amazing. Maddie stopped mentioning me in her Instagram stories. At the next family event, she was strangely reserved, no jokes at my expense. She barely met my eye, but when she did, it was with a cautious respect. My mother was the one who, as always, tried to bridge the silence. She pulled me aside after dinner, hugging me tightly. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, tears in her eyes. You handled yourself with such grace. I wish your father could see you now. I smiled. Thanks, Mom. I think I finally see myself. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just a win over Maddie, it was a transformation inside me. All those years spent shrinking in her shadow had been preparing me for this moment, not revenge, not humiliation, but the revelation of my own strength. My worth was never about who I married, or who laughed at me, or who followed me online. It was about the quiet courage to show up, do my job, and rewrite my own story, clause by clause. The world didn't change overnight. Maddie's wedding was still lavish and loud, her social media eventually rebounding with staged joy and curated happiness. But there was a new humility in her post-restraint, a second-guessing that hadn't been there before. And for me, there was something far better than public vindication. A life I could finally call my own, a voice I no longer hesitated to use, a future where my sister was just another character, not the narrator of my story. Somewhere along the way, Maddie and I found a new way of being sisters. Less rivalry, more respect. Not best friends, but no longer enemies. The punchlines faded. And in their place, something like understanding hard won, and all the more precious for it. That was the real reveal. The world might remember Maddie's wedding for its spectacle. I'd remember it for the day I finally stopped being the joke and started being the author of my own life. The days after the prenuptial signing felt strangely quiet, like the hush after a thunderstorm. I kept expecting another flare-up, a stinging text from Maddie, a snarky Instagram post, some new rumor to chase me down the courthouse corridor. Instead, there was only silence. For the first time in years, I was not at the center of Maddie's drama, nor was I her favorite target. I was simply free. It wasn't as though my life suddenly filled with confetti and celebration. There was no parade, no dramatic movie ending. The world outside barely noticed, but inside, everything had changed. Work felt lighter, my mornings less clouded by dread. I spent more time with colleagues after hours, finally feeling worthy of their laughter and friendship. When I visited my parents, my mother's pride shone in her eyes. Even my father, usually so reserved, left a voicemail one evening. I heard about the Walker contract. Good job, kid. The warmth in his voice nearly broke me. Maddie, meanwhile, retreated into the whirlwind of her wedding. She posted less and less about her sister, and more about the work of marriage, the fittings, the setbacks, the awkward family moments. She seemed quieter at family gatherings, humbled in a way I hadn't seen since we were little girls sharing secrets in our bunk beds, before rivalry became routine. Our paths still crossed, of course. There was the final wedding rehearsal, the dinner where Maddie tried, once, to slip an old joke into conversation. Well, if anyone wants to avoid a divorce, you know who to call. The table went silent, all eyes on me. I met her gaze calm, unafraid. Maddie forced a smile, her laughter faltering. Something in her eyes softened. For the first time, I saw regret there, not for the prenuptial, not for being bested, but for all the times she'd mistaken my silence for weakness. At the wedding itself, everything was perfect. The flowers, the food, the speeches, the music. Maddie was radiant, and Ethan looked proud and a little nervous, his hand never leaving hers. I watched them, wondering if she would ever thank me for protecting her, for making sure she'd never have to face what I did alone. Maybe she would, maybe not, but I no longer needed her approval. Later, as the dancing faded and the party thinned, Maddie found me standing on the terrace, looking out over the twinkling city lights. The night was soft, the air filled with the distant sound of laughter and clinking glasses. She hesitated, then stood beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We listened to the music, the gentle hush of the world turning on. Then, quietly, Maddie said, "You were always stronger than me. I just didn't want to see it." I turned, surprised by her honesty. "You never made it easy." She nodded, biting her lip. "I'm sorry, for all of it. I thought if I made you the joke, I could keep being the star. But you changed everything." "I didn't want to hurt you," I said. "I just needed to prove to myself that I could be more than your shadow, that I could stand on my own." "You did," Maddie admitted, voice small. "You really did." A strange peace settled between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the start of something new, a fragile truce, a shared understanding. We stood together in silence, the rivalry that once defined us dissolving into the night. In the weeks that followed, Maddie became less of a presence online, more of a person in real life. We talked sometimes not about the past, but about the future. She asked for advice about contracts, about life, about how to build something lasting instead of just something flashy. For the first time, our conversations felt real sister to sister, not adversary to adversary. I kept working hard, but with a new lightness. My name spread in legal circles, not just as Maddie's sister, but as a skilled attorney in my own right. New clients came, some even mentioning the Walker wedding agreement. Speaking of my composure and fairness, my confidence grew steady, earned, unbreakable. I realized then that the true payback wasn't humiliating Maddie or outshining her at her own game. It was finding my dignity, my purpose, and finally stepping into the light on my own terms. Maddie would always be Maddie aloud, brilliant, sometimes careless, always dramatic. But I had my own story, one she couldn't write for me. Months later, at a quiet family dinner, Maddie raised a glass. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes lingering on me. "And to sisters who save us from ourselves." We clinked glasses, laughter finally warm and genuine between us. I went home that night and stood at my window, watching the city's heartbeat flicker in the dark. My journey through heartbreak, public shame, and rivalry had brought me somewhere unexpected, not to victory over Maddie, but to a place where her opinion no longer defined me. I was the hero of my own story, and my happy ending wasn't about revenge or even recognition. It was about respect earned, not demanded. And that, I realized, was the kind of legacy no amount of mockery could ever erase.